Right, grass breeding at Aberystwyth. What's in the pipeline? Well, it's what's in the pipeline and what's been in the pipeline a little bit in this talk. I'll be talking about some of the projects we've been involved in the breeding and some of the results from those, and just giving you an overview of the breeding really. Now, you notice in that first slide there were a few names, just so you can put faces to those names. This is the grass breeding team here. One of them is in the audience anyway. I think Sarah was going to be here as well. And you'd have had a representation then from the two greatest rugby nations on earth. Sarah Palmer, the diploid grass breeder, is from New Zealand, and most of the rest of us are from Wales. You know, the other group. Anyway, I had to put it in somewhere. No contrast, 10 people there involved in grass breeding. As you know, it's the centenary of the Welsh Plant Breeding Station, which led to the formation of IBERS. This is the staff in 1920. This is the total staff of the Institute. It was founded in 1919. George Stapledon, a shepherd, and his dog. That was the total staff, apparently. There's Stapledon there. We don't wear the socks and the trousers quite like that anymore. This man, T.J. Jenkin, was the Rye Grass breeder here. He's responsible for breeding things like S23, S24, and Captain R.D. Williams developed the white and red clover varieties. Interestingly, Stapledon was more convinced of the value of cocksfoot than ryegrass, so he concentrated on cocksfoots, which you can see here. Actually, this is the entry for in our ledger, which you can see that goes back to 1919 for S23 when it was developed. In 1938 it was actually bred. But below it, you can see some of the cocksfoot varieties there, BC 1163 down. And the initials by them there are RGS, Stapledon's initials. So S23 was a groundbreaking variety. It made quite an impact. This is a seed production of S23. And what you see in the other picture there is the varieties that were available at the time are very stemmy. On the left-hand side, they were ones that produced a lot of seed, so there's a hell of a lot of stem on them. They weren't of any real value for actual grazing, but on the right you can see the sort of collections that Stapledon made of very leafy types. So he was breeding from ones from the actual pasture rather than the other seed companies which were just producing seed, worrying about producing seed. And the impact there, you can see the increase there in the column for something like S23 from basically zero before 1939 up to 5,000 acres of seed production. So it made quite an impact. And the other thing about it, as a variety, you can see here it lasted from 1938 and only came off the national list in 1993. So quite a lasting impact. And that doesn't happen anymore. Modern varieties, you can see Alleles there, went on the list in 93, was off by 2006. It's a very different environment now to what it was in the 1930s. Incidentally, S23 was also used as a sports turf variety. It was actually, they reckon it was the actual grass used in Wembley Stadium. Therefore, we can claim a little bit of the World Cup in 1966 for Wales. It was our grass that made it happen. And just as an interest, the comparison between the past and today, I'm not going to dwell too long on this, but we have here, you can see for perennial ryegrass, in that early period from 1930 to 1947, 8 varieties produced, only 3 were in commerce, which were S23, S24 and S101. That's all. The reputation was built on 3 perennial ryegrass varieties. There were other species as well, obviously, but perennial, only 3 of them. And then you come to the bad days of the 60s up to the 80s. 25 varieties produced, 1 actually got on the national list because policy dictated at that time we weren't supposed to breed commercial varieties and compete with commercial companies. We were publicly funded, therefore we weren't supposed to compete with commerce. And only 1 got out. And then it's all changed from 1987 onwards. 60 varieties produced, 27 are actually in commerce. And a lot of them are still there on the list if you have a look. So quite a step change in variety production. And the reason why? We have a commercial partner, Germinal. This isn't just an advert. Explains, even though Helen is sitting there from Germinal, but it explains how we suddenly have a better commercial focus. We've learned that we have to compete with those commercial varieties. We have to produce varieties that are different, but they do have to compete and get on the list. So having a commercial partner isn't always a bad thing. It is very much a good thing for us. It made all the difference to the breeding here at Ibers. We concentrate on the rye grasses mainly because they are the highest yielding, the highest quality sort of grasses are around. There's a paper by John Frame from 1993, I think, which shows you the comparison between ryegrass and other grasses. And it's quite convincing. And hence, 80% of the grass seed sold in the UK is ryegrass of one form or another. 69% is a perennial ryegrass. So ryegrass is king. So we concentrate on that. And as you can see from this, from here, our main breeding effort goes on in the diploid perennial ryegrass. We create novel germplasm, novel varieties there, which then feeds through into producing tetraploids, which are crossed with tetraploid talions to produce the tetraploid hybrids. So the innovation in the diploids passes through the system into the other main species that we breed and germinal market. Now, target traits or characters, whatever you want to call them. They're the core traits, what I call them, which is yield, dry matter yield, seasonal yield, disease resistance, persistency, digestibility, and winter hardiness. Those are the sort of things that get you onto the national list and then onto the recommended list. And most breeders are breeding for those traits. What we like to do is breed for something extra. Water-soluble carbohydrate or high sugar. That's been one of the selling points of a lot of Aber varieties. I'm not going to go into that in great detail today, but that's an extra, an added trait. We breed good varieties for all the core traits and then have an added win-win situation with them. The other thing worth mentioning, seed production. We're doing a lot of work on that because if you can't produce seed, what's the point of breeding a variety? So that's one of the things. And then here, distinctiveness, uniformity, and stability. You have to do that to get your variety on the national list. You have to show it's distinct from all others, so you haven't stolen somebody else's variety, or more importantly for us, nobody's stolen our varieties. It has to be uniform, so it's protection for the farmer, and it has to be stable, so over generations, it's the same genetics feeding through, if you like. So those are extras you have to put on top of those agronomic traits. And those are the main recommended lists that we're interested in: England and Wales, Republic of Ireland, Scotland, and Northern Ireland, although Northern Ireland hasn't been updated in the last few years. There are issues with funding for the recommended list. But these list all the data. That's our main aim. We have to get on that recommended list, otherwise nothing sells. At the top, value for cultivation and use. That is the description of the agronomic trials and the data that goes in there. So that's VCU trials. And then the other category, as I mentioned before, was DOS. So you have to pass those two areas before you get onto the recommended list. Now, coming to current objectives, I hope somebody's going to tell me about time, because I forgot to set the timer on my phone before I started. So if I go over, just throw things at me, please. Our objectives there are to improve these things. Dry matter production, yield, and nitrogen use efficiency are essential. Fiber digestibility adds to the overall digestibility, so we're looking at that. Seasonal growth to ensure we have a good spread of growth through the year. Persistency, tillering, the density of the sward, ability to stand up to mechanical damage, etc. Looking at different pathogens, and Dressler has become more and more important, as I'll tell you a bit later on. Seed production, we have to do that. Lipid content we've been working on as well. So we're aiming to improve all those traits. We need to maintain or improve, if we can, sugar content. Freezing tolerance. It may not have been relevant this winter, but we know just a few years ago we had some very hard winters. So we have to monitor that and ensure that our varieties still can stand up to cold temperatures. Drought tolerance, I don't have to say any more. Last year is an example. Even a drought in Aberystwyth. I remember the last one, 1976. So, yeah, it does happen. Resistance to crown rust and other pathogens as you go along. Mineral balance, we need to ensure that we don't breed varieties that are prone to hypermagnesemia, for example. And there'll be a bit more about that later. As I mentioned, this public good traits, we want to breed good varieties, but we need to make sure we've got something extra for the public good. Now, nutrient use efficiency, obviously making better use of the nutrients that are out there. Feed quality, ensuring the varieties are more efficient for animal nutrition, whether it's sugar, lipids, or even protein. Environmental traits, methane reduction. We all know about agriculture being one of the highest methane producers in the UK. So if we can do something to help with that, which we're aiming to do. And then root architecture, uptake of those nutrients, and also ensuring there's drought tolerance. So all these are public good. We're adding something to the variety. This lists some of our success. We operate differently to other commercial breeders. We have a breeding population, which is like having a pedigree herd, and you develop from that. So we're working with this breeding population, and we've consistently, you can see all these varieties. This is the intermediates over 15 generations, and we still have genetic variation there. So we produce these varieties from that population. And as you can see, so we can build on the success of previous varieties. We're improving that population constantly, in addition to selecting elite varieties out of it. And just to emphasize that improvement in our varieties, and a little bit of showing the difference over the years here, this is a graph of yield, and at the bottom axis there is the date those varieties got onto the recommended list. And what you can see is all breeders have been improving it. So grass varieties have improved in the past 50 years. The newer varieties, show quite an improvement on the older ones down the bottom here. But I should have plotted a line on here. I think you can see that the majority of the Aber varieties are on a different line to the other one. We'd like to think we're improving at a higher rate than other breeders. A lot of you have probably seen this graphic before, just illustrating how high sugar grass, I'm not going to go into it in detail, but they're more nitrogen use efficient. So fertilizer goes on the grass, the nitrogen in the fertilizer, the cow grazes, takes it in. The high sugar means a more efficient use of the protein in that feed, that the bugs in the rumen use that as a substrate, as a feed, and they make more of the protein in the grazed pasture available to the animal, resulting in improved nitrogen output in milk yield and less coming out in the urine, and some people have said less coming out in the feces on the high sugar grass, but on the whole, I think it's about the same. So there's less wastage of nitrogen coming out the back end of the animal. And we have made progress in that as well, in that you have a list of varieties here and the date they were produced, and you can see the improvement in yield as we've gone along, improvement in digestibility here, and in the silage cut, the digestibility there as well. So we have made year-on-year improvements. And just to emphasize it again, comparing Abermagic here to an older variety, Talbot, and you can see the increase in yield is quite considerable. Same for the digestibility, carbohydrate content, and ground cover. And in the late heading, the similar thing, Aberbite compared to S23, there is a considerable improvement on yield, DMD, WSC. Doesn't look a lot for ground cover, but when I tell you that Aberbite is a tetraploid, which always tend to have lower tillering than the diploid, that Aberbite, a tetraploid, has an equivalent ground cover to S23. So that's another indicator of the progress we've made. Now, on to what is happening, what has happened recently. How am I doing for time? Do I have to speed up? Nobody will understand me then.
5 minutes.
5 minutes left. Oh, right, we're going to be very quick now. Might go a little bit into the questions, we'll see. So the aim of the project is we want to develop techniques, scientific development, and animal trials, which is the advantage we have as an institute. We can go all the way from develop the basic science through the breeding to animal trials and prove the efficacy of what we're breeding for. So we have all these projects here. I'll deal with them now. One thing to bear in mind, there's no direct funding for the plant breeding here. What we do is get funding for subject areas and make sure the breeding is at the core. So the money that comes in is to look at different areas, lipids, whatever, roots, but we use it to use the breeding population as the core of the work. And so the commercial funding from Germinal is used to leverage more public funding with the funding streams that are available now. I talked a little bit about Brimvar, which was a project we were looking at improving seed set. And Danny then, it was FTLD1 was the marker, was it? A genetic marker for improving seed set. And we wanted to see if we could use that to improve the seed set in our varieties. We created a range of varieties with different percentages of a beneficial allele for that FTLD1 locus. And this is the, well, not quite deleterious, but certainly lowers seed yield there. And these were broadly equivalent for agronomic performance. And that did work. You can see here, as the increase in the percentage of the A allele, the B allele there, that we actually, seed yield increases. So the one with the AA, the 100% of the AA alleles in the population, has the highest seed number. So that's reflecting the seed set. So we can increase seed yield without compromising forage quality and yield. So I'm going through these very quickly, I'm aware. I don't know, will this be made available to people if they want it? We can do it. Yeah, you can read it at your leisure then. Another one, Grass, another project where we're looking at lipids, a very energy-dense nutrient in the grasses, and there's a high proportion in grasses of polyunsaturated fatty acids in grasses anyway. But we look to increase the amount of lipid which would provide more energy for the animal. And we have a population here, BA14609, which has just been sown in trials now, deriving from this Lipigrass, where we're going to evaluate it this year and see whether that has carried through. The basic research and looking for markers has carried through into this variety with an altered lipid profile. Sure Root, another, this was a project based primarily on Festuloliums. And you can see here, one of the reasons for looking at Festuloliums is prior, this Festulolium variety here, it's quite obvious there, the amount of root in that variety. And it goes much deeper, and there's a lot more root there, thicker roots as well, compared to some of the ryegrasses such as Aberystwyth, perennial ryegrass there, and Aberepic Italian. But Sure Root was looking at flooding and water retention. If you've got thicker roots, deeper roots, you have bigger holes in the soil as the roots die back, therefore the soil holds more water. John Harper will probably give you more information on that, and John there is actually looking at breeding newer Festuloliums as well. Festulolium is a complex subject. Again, I probably haven't got time to go into it here, but if you want to catch me afterwards, I'll explain why you have to be careful with Festuloliums. And there is increased water holding capacity of soils. There are Festuloliums hybrids between fescues and ryegrass do have advantages. You can see the advantages here of the ryegrasses, the digestibility, summer growth, spring and establishment, where the fescues are weaker. Fescues have advantages in stress tolerance in general, so combining the two could give you your ideal variety. Now into another area of work. And I think you'll appreciate the range of areas of work we're involved in breeding. Looking at Dressler, which is becoming more common as a disease. And Life, who will be talking to you at the end there, can explain perhaps a bit more of it. I don't know if you've included it in your slides, Life. You mentioned it. Okay. But basically, it's a disease that as your grass gets a bit rank, if it's you're too late grazing, too late cutting, whatever, you'll see these black spots coming in. Hopefully not quite to this extent. This is the extreme. And it tends to affect all varieties, really. It is a very basic pathogen. And, but it is a growing problem. So Life has been doing some work of crossing between high sugar grasses and an ecotype with improved Dressler resistance, and been selecting there to, oh yeah, and you can see that's actually the selection going on there, and you can see those are my wife's fingers there. I thought I'd better put them in. she's doing some of the selection, selecting and then back crossing to develop basically a high sugar variety with improved Dressler resistance, or at least as a source of Dressler resistance for further crossing. So that is ongoing. We're in the second back cross cycle now, and some of the material from that is in trials in Melksham at Germinal's research station, where they have a higher incidence of Dressler as a disease. We come on to one of my pet subjects, magnesium content magnet. It's a project we're doing with British Geological Survey and University of Nottingham, where we're looking to identify markers for increased magnesium concentration and also develop a support tool for forage nutrient management. It's quite a wide-ranging one. But I started on this back in 1984, and the liars amongst you will say I don't look any different now, but I do know different. But we developed a variety with high magnesium content, which we know did affect hypermag in the animal. But what we were looking at is, does it work under all soil magnesium contents? And what you can see here is we were putting on magnesium fertilizer to simulate increases in magnesium in the soil. And you see the magnet actually did perform best compared to control varieties under all those managements. And also working Life here again has been looking at markers, molecular markers for tetany ratio, which is an indicator of hypermag, and found 5 markers associated with improved tetany ratio, which we're going to use in conjunction with marker work done at Nottingham to see can we actually now select for improved magnesium content in perennial ryegrass. So there's still a couple of years to go on this project, but we do have 5 QTLs there, which Life has identified, which seem to be related to magnesium uptake. So we may be able to use those to select for magnesium in future. Another seed yield project this time. I know I'm going through these very quickly, and I apologize. But here we're looking at improving seed yield. I'm building on that previous project I told you about, Brim, which was only looking at really seed sets, so number of seeds. But all these traits, really, number of reproductive stems, spikelets per head, all these things contribute to seed yield. We know we can alter this number of seeds, but we need to then establish what else can we select for to improve seed yield altogether. So it involves quite a lot of detailed work. So Sarah Palmer, who I mentioned earlier, is actually looking at seed yield of different plants within the breeding population and relating it to those seed yield traits. So there's quite a lot of measurement going on, measuring number of spikelets per head, etc. We are getting close to the end of all the projects, and you'll be relieved to know. Apple, a wonderful name for a project. As you can see, application of innovative plant breeding. I think the innovation was in creating that acronym from that title. So we were looking at improving nitrogen use efficiency in ryegrass and phosphate use efficiency in white clover. Again, as with, for environmental benefit on top of sort of yield and agronomic performance. And this involved, again, looking at markers. You'll hear a lot about that, and Life will explain more about markers probably. Sorry, I'm foisting it all on you, Life. And discover markers for nitrogen and phosphate use efficiency that we can incorporate in future breeding. So we have here that there are 3 markers being discovered in this project that we can use to make selections within our elite breeding population. I just mentioned in passing genomic selection, which Life will explain again. I use your name a lot, Life. But it's a method, a genomic breeding, Life will explain it, where we're looking at not just individual markers, all markers on the genome as a whole. Just in passing, mention the technologies that are available between the Phenomics Centre here at IBERS, things like lab NIRS and harvester-mounted NIRS, which enable us to make efficiencies in the breeding process that lead to things like genomic selection and using FTIR, which John Morby, he was here somewhere. Anyway, he's been using that, looking at lipids and this. So we're developing a lot of these techniques to aid in the breeding. But those public good traits, which I showed you at the start, so those are the basic ones. We're trying to influence those, but we also need to look at seed production, Dressler resistance, magnesium, and use genome-wide selection. So there's a lot we're trying to do to fit into all the breeding work. And the difficulty comes, those varieties, as I said at the start, have to be agronomically good to get on the recommended list. How are the new traits evaluated in the recommended list? They aren't. We have to look at them ourselves, produce data to support these traits, like the high sugar. But the important thing is that they are win-win traits, that they only add to the usefulness of those varieties, like the WSC story, that we're adding something to an already good variety. And the fact that we can demonstrate the impact of these traits, whether it's using the Northwick Farm platform in Devon or any animal production work here. And just to show that it's not us blowing our own trumpet, we have won quite a few awards for all this work already. So, diolch yn fawr iawn, thank you. And just as a plug there, I understand there's going to be a forage breeding special access day on May the 1st. So if any of you want to actually come out the field and see, I can't guarantee we'll have the harvester out there, but you'll be able to see some of the plots and see the actual work going on in the field. So thank you very much.
We've got time for maybe 1 or 2 quick questions if anyone's got anything.
But I've got 3 quick ones. Sorry. Firstly, it's about nitrogen use efficiency.
Yes.
No mention of sulphur.
No, we do add sulphur to our plots, so we are aware of the issue of sulphur. We would like to look at it, maybe if we in future we could look at sulphur and the relation with selenium, I think, is it?
Yes, just but the sulphur nitrogen ratio is quite important.
Yeah.
I just wondered whether you had thought of that, putting it in.
Yeah.
Secondly, was do you do anything on pH tolerance? Because the number of dairy farmers I've got, that you tell them they need lime and they look at you and say, I'll do it next year.
No, we haven't done anything on that. What happens is that people like Germinal will talk to farmers and inform of the importance of pH, but we haven't looked at pH tolerance per se. But there might be an opportunity, John Davis at the back in Pushpeiran, where pH is probably highest on your agenda up there. So there might be an opportunity for us to work with Pushpeiran and look at pH tolerance there.
And the third one is, I've been doing work on fungicides on grass for years.
Yeah.
Got good responses, but none of the farmers ever wanted to spray it with some better fungicides. Have you tried fungicides on Dressler?
Well, no, we just concentrate on breeding for improved Dressler resistance. That's another a decision outside our remit, if you like, whether you use fungicides or not.
You haven't looked at doing the combination of resistance and fungicides together?
No, we haven't looked at that. We think we can achieve a lot with breeding. You know, one of the German, Helen, I'm taking your time. German carried out a survey at the grasslands and muck where farmers of beef, sheep, dairy had to rank all the traits and which was most important. And I think in all three areas, the least important, according to farmers, was disease. It's not least important. What it is, they don't see it because not just us, but all forage breeders are doing their job and breeding for disease resistance. So it's not perceived as a problem because we're already doing something about it. So I think that's the methodology that we'll...
The funny thing is the immunity market will spread fungicides all the time.
Yeah, yeah.
But the outdoor market doesn't touch it.
No, but you're talking about a higher value, you know, a golf course, football pitches, for example, Premiership football pitches, they can't afford to have, you know, with the cameras on them. Sorry? Yeah, yeah. Again, a high value crop. Yeah.
Just one more question.
Yeah.
You mentioned heterosis. Do you think there's any heterosis to be accessed in these populations? So F1 heterosis?
Yes, there could be. Danny, there is. Yes, there is there, and there must be because the progress we're making. You'd have thought after 15 generations that we would have effectively run out of heterosis because we're working within a fairly closed breeding population, but it's still there. So there are implications there. But I think yes, it's something we can look at. And Danny has a potential project there to look at this, don't you? Look at heterosis. Yeah, I thought. Sorry? Yeah, sorry.
The problem is fixing it, I think.
Yeah.
The problem with current breeding programs, although they are making advances, they are losing out on heterosis because you can't fix it.
You can't fix it.
You're effectively slaves for additive genes. Yeah,
somebody once described the grass breeding as controlled heterosis. You have to have heterosis there because it's an outbreeder, but you can't have too much, otherwise you don't get through the DOS. So, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay.